2391's back. Or is it? I'm going to run you through the criteria for this new 2391. There's a lot of people saying it's back, but it's not as hard as it used to be. And there's some truth in that. A lot of people have requested a video on it as well. What I'm going to do is do a series of little videos that cover the actual outcomes of the course, the new course. So there's be 4 or 5 of those, followed by a last one which will go through some of the practical. But it's not a training course because it's a lot of information, but it's more of a reference of information video that I'm going to do a sequence of. So this will be outcome 1, and then I'll follow on with outcomes 2, 3, 4, etc. with those. Right, the 2391 5.2. The 5.2 is the course that covers both the initial verification and the periodic inspection. So it's the inspection and testing qualification now. Okay, a couple of key things we need to remember. It's a 50 guided learning hour course. Now, some training companies have decided to train the 2394 and the 2395 in a single block, squeezing it all in. And this new 239152 allows that as well. But you mustn't sacrifice adequate learning to squeeze it all in. And a lot of training companies do this where they compete with each other and they shave off training time. The requirement under Ofqual, under the standard here, is 50 guided learning hours, and they've recently introduced the TQT, the total qualification time. That is 67 hours. So what this means is when you do the 239152, you should be subjected to just over 6 days on an 8-hour day of actual learning. So that's either receiving training via an e-learning platform or training via a tuition platform, but actual instruction. The 67 hours, which is over 8 days, that is total time. So that will also include self-study, it will include assessments, preparation for assessment, and things like that, or practical experience gathering. So what you need to do is make sure that your training doesn't just do 50 hours including assessment, because you're sacrificing what's considered as necessary learning time there. Okay? Right, so the layout of the outcomes. We have outcome 1, understanding requirements for inspection and testing. That's what we're going to cover in this video. We'll then do one for outcome 2, 3, and 4. 5, as you can see, there is no actual questions on that in the assessment because that's a performance outcome, so there's a practical on that. So the first outcome we'll cover is number 1, and there'll be 13 questions from this outcome in the planned assessment. Something else you need to know is RPL, recognising of prior learning. Every single training centre needs to have the recognition of prior learning for any candidate that they deliver a qualification to. Suitable prior learning for the 239152 would be the 2392 plus experience, really. If your prior learning is the 2382 or the 2377, practically it's not going to work. The 2382 will help with some of the theoretical parts of the 239152. But yeah, if you haven't got prior learning, that's fine, as long as you're suitable for the training. But if you have some prior learning, or you've done the 2391 before, or the 2394 and 2395 before, submit that evidence to the trainer, and it might be that they can actually just predetermine that you don't need to do the whole course and just do some of the reassessments. If you want to update it, I don't know why you would. Right. So, the unit. The aim of the unit is designed to enable the learners to understand principles, practices, and legislation for the initial verification and the periodic inspection of electrical installations with statutory, non-statutory regulations and requirements. Its content is the knowledge needed by a learner to underpin the application of the skills of the inspection, testing, commissioning, and certification of electrical installations. Okay, good stuff. Right. So we'll do that with the first outcome, which is to understand the requirements for inspection and testing. So what are the requirements of the first outcome? So these are the things you'll have to study, and when you come to be assessed, they'll be the things that you're assessed on your knowledge of. So, you must be able to understand how to state the purpose of initial verification and periodic inspection and testing. I mean, that's a good starting point. Do you know the difference between the two? If you don't, read it up. But the initial verification is the first check, so that means it's only subjected to new installations. Okay, you can see that in Guidance Notes 3, 2.1. Periodic inspection is a system that's already in service and subjected to an in-service inspection. Explain reasons for conducting types of inspection and testing. Okay, types of inspection and testing. Well, there are two types, the initial verification and the periodic. The reasons for the initial verification under Guidance Notes 3, 2.1, to ensure the installed equipment is of the correct type and complies with the applicable British standard. Yeah, it's correctly installed, selected and erected, and it's not visibly damaged. The first two really is correlating to the design. Is it as designed? The periodic, on the other hand, is normally driven by other reasons: change of occupancy, change of use, legislation, licensing, insurance requirements. So it's not that something has happened that needs to be checked before you power it up. It's just that here's a system and we need to just make sure it's still suitable or it's being used suitably. Compare initial verification and periodic inspection testing processes. Well, that sounds complicated, but it's very, very simple. When you look through Guidance Notes 3, you've got the different section. You've got the section for the initial verification and a section for the periodic inspection. The section for initial verification has the tests, and it gives them as a sequence of tests. So the tests must be carried out in a sequence on an initial verification. Periodic inspection, however, can actually create danger if you're not following the right process, but we actually select tests as a sample exercise to supplement an inspection. We don't do all of the tests. We sample a part of the installation, we visually inspect it, and we'll then determine a suitable sample of what tests to do. So we'll use the tests as different tools to further investigate the system. Whilst with the initial verification, you do them in the order that they're there. The assessment criteria for 1.4: identify statutory and non-statutory documents that may be required during the inspection and testing process. With all the other courses, the ability to determine a statutory from a non-statutory is absolute, and this shouldn't be a problem for you. But if you had a question asking you to identify two statutory documents, you would use Health and Safety at Work Act, Electricity at Work Regs. They'll be relevant to inspection and testing. With non-statutory, you've got a number. You've got the regulations, Guidance Notes 3, GS 38, the on-site guide. You may have a question asking which one is the most suitable for inspection testing or is most defined to inspection and testing. We know that to be Guidance Note 3. 1.5, identify documents that would be completed and issued following the initial verification and the periodic. Again, if you have good knowledge of the wine regs would help with this, but otherwise it's in the guidance note. The initial verification documentation is the minor works cert, or the minor electrical installation works cert, and then the electrical installation cert, which we do for new circuits or fuse board changes. The installation cert will be accompanied by a schedule of inspections, schedule of test results, and a guidance document. Little parts like that guidance document you need to remember, because that will be submitted in your question if you were asked on this, and if you miss that out you lose a mark on them. The periodic inspection is the electrical installation condition report, schedule of inspections, schedule of test results, and again the guidance to the recipient. So understanding the different types of documentation is very important there. 1.6, identify information is needed in order to carry out an initial verification in accordance with BS 7671 and Guidance Notes 3. Agree the extent and limitations and determine appropriate sampling. Okay, let's break those down. So carry out the initial verification in accordance with the regulations. So you need to actually review that. Look in the regs or look in Guidance Notes 3. What does it say are the requirements for the initial verification? Well, it starts off with the assessment of general characteristics, verifying them. So, maximum demand. What is the maximum demand of the system? Have you applied diversity? A little reminder on this. There we go. The diversity is the allowance made for circuits that would not always be turned on at the same time. Okay, another illustration for diversity taken from the old design guide is here an illustration of a typical domestic demand with diversity, with number of occupants. So do consider your understanding on diversity. What else do we have? We have the number and type of live conductors, types of system earthing. Familiarize yourself with those. TNCS, TT, TNS. Remember those. Okay, so here we have an illustration: supply transformer, intake point, load. Protective conductor goes back to the supply. Earthing conductor goes to the supply, separate to the neutral, but not in the ground. So it's Terra neutral, but it's then run separately. If it was combined, it would run in the neutral and then come out. And if it was run as a TT, it would go in an electrode here. So understand your different earthing systems, very important. The nature of the current and frequency, okay, yeah. The respective short circuit current at the origin, the PFC, and the earth full loop impedance ZE at the part of the system external. Those are important things. Here we go, ZE and PFC. Your ability to understand how the earth full loop impedances work with ZE and ZS and R1, R2 will be tested on, I expect. So have a good read of those. Again, you'll probably cover the subject on a course in more information, but have a good read of Guidance Notes 3. I can do some videos explaining the tests individually. I probably will do that on the practical video anyway, to be honest. It just makes it easier for me to explain it. But have a good understanding on these. These are parts of the initial verification. We also had a type of overcurrent protected device at the origin of the system, so BS88 or BS1361 or whatever. Beyond from that, we've got diagrams, charts, or tables. So for the initial verification, we need to identify the type of composition of each circuit, including points of utilization, number of size of conductors, method used to comply with the requirements for basic and fault protection. Again, this is where your BS7671 might help you here. You know, is it ADS? Is it double insulation, SELV, PELV? What method of protection is used? Any circuits vulnerable to a particular test, that's very important with inspection and testing. So do you have RCBOs? Do you have transformers? Do you have dimmer switches? Anything that's sensitive to a particular test. Installation resistance testing is common for consideration, but other tests can also have effects on equipment. So that was A. B is agree the extent and limitations. So let's go to that. Right, that's in Guidance Notes 3, 3.6. It is essential the inspector knows the extent of the installation to be inspected and any criteria regarding the limit of the inspection. This should be recorded. This is a common thing I actually see in the real world, is where quite often the inspector arrives and he needs to either expand to investigate further or chooses to reduce the sample or provide limitations due to things like the inability to access luminaires. Whatever happens to the extent and limitations, it must always be agreed with the client. If there are scenarios where a extent limitation has to be imposed due to a working obstruction or due to an unknown problem, that's fine to carry on working safely, but the client should be consulted so that they know that they're getting a shallower sample of their work, etc., etc. From an initial verification point of view, though, we don't limit or sample that. We do our first check as it's installed. If we have an initial verification such as putting cables in, and then we come back when all the floorboards are down and the walls are plastered, we should have done the initial verification before that happened. So the initial verification isn't a last step. It's something that should be carried out during the installation process at pivotal points, at points when cables are about to be covered. You check them then. So it's not done right at the end of the job. It's done through the job and then energized, and then a little bit more is done at the end. Determine the appropriate sampling. 1.6c. The inspector will be required of all of his or her experience in selecting the sample sizes and must consider the appropriate age of the installation or condition of it. Typically, if you've got something that's old and knackered, you're probably going to want to take a larger chunk, a larger sample. If you've got something that's still smells new and is pretty clean, has barely been touched since installation, probably not a lot to look at. Maybe try to identify where the biggest demand has been used, or if there has been any change of use within the building, to then go there. So, you can't really say, oh, I'll always test 20% and take that attitude to every single job. Every single job will be different. And so the ability to assess the condition of a system to determine how much we've got to test is very important. The type and usage of the installation or part thereof, also important. I was at a factory in August, and the chunk they wanted me to do testing on was mostly administration offices location, and all of the factory was quite a rough industrial environment and in quite a bad condition. But due to the sampling selection, my time was given to looking at people sat at desks most of the time. A couple of days in, I had the inspector come in. I said, look, my time's better off used out there. Let's move the sample over. And so that's what we ended up doing. Ambient environmental conditions. The apparent effectiveness of the ongoing maintenance. If you're going to determine a sample, what is the ongoing maintenance strategy? Is it very aggressive? Is it very alert? Or is it very relaxed? If there's a lot of ongoing maintenance, it might be that you don't need to do much in the way of periodic inspection testing because the existing maintenance is sufficient. Period of time elapsed since the previous inspection and testing, that's the normal way we would determine it. We give things a 5-year, a 4-year, a 3-year in domestic, a 10-year frequency. But it's important to always think outside that. We can use them as guidelines, but they are only guidelines, they're not rules. The size of the installation, consultation with the owner, and the quality of records. I was at a factory last week reviewing their system, and past 3 contractors they've had haven't got a clue what they're doing with inspection and testing, so now we're going to have to investigate further into their existing system, because the work they've been doing, we need to investigate if it's under par. So look at the quality of the existing records. If it's done by incompetent electricians, even if they do have the NIC badges or similar like these guys do, if the paperwork ain't good, the work probably isn't any good either. So you may have to look into that as well. 1.7. Define the responsibilities of the relevant signatories in relation to certification and reporting. Okay, so who signs the documents and what are their responsibilities? So we have a design, construction and an inspector / reviewer. Okay, what are their responsibilities? Well, that's fairly obvious. Okay. 1.8. Identify the type of information to be recorded on documents for the following: the initial verification and the periodic inspection and testing. So if you were to review the documents and see what needs to be written on them, that's it. So the minor works cert has a section called essential tests. So that's not all of the tests, it's the recognized tests, and details of departure. Okay, so what type of information will be recorded on that? Alright, the electrical installation certificate has the designer signature, construction signature, inspection schedules, details of departures. So these are all different aspects to each other. They're different things on one form from the next. What makes the periodic inspection documentation unique is that one has an observation and recommendation section. So we wouldn't do observations and recommendations on an install or a minor work. We do them only on a periodic. And as I said earlier on, limitations, they wouldn't be applied to a minor work or an install. They'd only be exclusive to a periodic. So when you're thinking of all the certification, because you're doing both initial verification and periodic inspection and testing, you need to make sure you understand that if I'm talking about limitations, if I'm talking about sampling, I'm talking about periodics. If I'm talking about strict sequence testing, I'm talking about initial verification. So you've got to try to understand how one is different to the other, and they're not all just inspection and testing. Alright, this is the end of the outcome 1.9. The last part, describe the purpose of the inspection testing documents and the requirements for recording and retention. So we can comply with 5149 part 6 and part 7. Okay, the need to record it. The electricity work regulations say that we should have documentation as a way of proving traceability as well. But the regs say we need to document the work. It's as simple as that. So records of all checks, inspections and tests, including the test results, should be kept throughout the working life of an installation. At times I go to a place and ask for certs, they haven't got any. It's crazy. This will enable deterioration to be identified. They could also be used as a management tool to ensure the maintenance checks are being carried out and assess their effectiveness. Right. That's outcome 1. Okay. So go back over that. So that's just covering understanding the requirements for inspection and testing. The next video will cover safety management procedures when undertaking inspection and testing. That'll be outcome 2. But outcome 1, the first outcome. Alright, go through this again if you want. These are just the things you've got to start thinking about. I will be creating courses on it, training courses on this. But I've got to decide as to how much I'd provide on YouTube for that, because I could piss a lot of people off if I just put them all on there. So we'll see. But in the meantime, here are the outcomes. Here are the areas we've got to revise. Here are the areas we've got to learn. I can do individual videos on all of these areas. If you feel that may help you, let me know. I'll carry on doing some more outcome videos. I'll then do the practical videos for the course as well. I'm just going to stick with the 239152. If you're doing the 239150 or the 239151, which is the initial only or the periodic only, I can try my best to flag one part against another, but let me know. But I'm just going to stick with the 239152 because I think that's the one most people are going to go for. Alright guys, I'm going to stop this now because it's Saturday night, 2:48 in the morning. Yeah, so I will close this one down and I'll start getting the next one started in the morning time. Good luck with your training though. Good luck with it. Well done for starting it. See you later.